Cool. Well, hi everyone. My name is Simon Curran. I'm an associate product manager at TripAdvisor, and today I'm going to be talking about breaking into product. So firstly, a bit of background about myself. So I recently graduated from Trinity College Dublin with a degree in business and economics, which is probably quite a common background for a PM. My time in university was rather entrepreneurial. So when I was 18, I founded my first startup called Stageville. Stageville was an event ticketing platform that used a crowdfunding system. It traded for about 2 years and transacted about €50,000. And yeah, obviously it didn't really work out. Then 2 years later, I founded my second venture, or co-founded, a startup called Pledge Notes. And this was a note-sharing platform for students. That venture only lasted about 8 months. And neither venture really achieved product market fit, as I say. But overall, you learn a huge amount from starting your own companies. Before my final year in university, I did a growth internship at Skyscanner in Edinburgh, where I focused on App Store optimization, or ASO, for 3 of Skyscanner's smaller but growing markets. And there, I learned a lot about hypothesis testing and the importance of metrics. And it was also the first place I came across the role of the product manager. So now to talk about my extensive product management career. So I did an internship last summer at Shazam in London, and that was a great experience, and I worked on some really cool projects there, such as the redesign of the Shazam for Mac app and the version 2 of their iMessage app as well. And then shortly after my internship, I applied and became an associate product manager at TripAdvisor in Oxford. So I work for TripAdvisor Experiences, which is a marketplace where travelers can book things to do on their holidays, such as walking tours or wine tastings or other more unique experiences as well. So I work on the supply side of that marketplace, and I focus on payments and security. It's a really exciting time to be at the company, and if any of you have any questions about my role there or TripAdvisor in general, please do come and chat to me afterwards. So now to talk about breaking into product and how to land your first product role. So firstly, getting into product is hard. And there are a couple of reasons for this, and some are really obvious. So firstly, in tech anyway, you only need product managers where development actually happens. As some of you can probably tell, I'm from Dublin, and there really weren't that many product manager roles there when I was applying, particularly at entry level. I think I only applied for 1 position. Then you just don't need as many product managers at your company as you do engineers, so there'll be a one-to-many relationship. And also, not all types of companies require PMs. So startups and early stage companies typically mightn't have PMs or might have a very small product team. And it's only companies that reach sufficient size that tend to have the resources to take on entry-level product managers. And finally, it's a catch-22. So even entry-level positions say product management experience preferred. But how can you get that if it's an entry-level position? So it is quite hard to get in, but on a positive note, there are more and more opportunities that you see all the time, and it's really growing. Even since I was applying last year, I've noticed a lot more positions. So getting into product is hard, but it is doable, and it's all about positioning. So next I'm going to show you a diagram. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Simon, you're a nice guy. We've all seen this diagram 1,000 times before. And you're thinking, kill me now. But this diagram provides a really useful starting point. So I challenge you to take a look at the diagram and then take a long, cold, hard look at yourself and identify your weak spots. So for me, I had a business background and also was involved in a couple of startups. So I was quite comfortable on the business side of things. But I identified tech as a real weakness of mine. So what I did was I enrolled in a Code Academy intensive course learning JavaScript and React. And if you ask me now to integrate with the Spotify and Yelp APIs, I wouldn't be able to do it. But at the time, that really helped and showed a lot of a willingness to understand code. Then in the design and user experience side of things, I learned basic graphic design, UX and UI using Affinity Designer. But overall, I would probably tend to emphasize more learning the tech skills as opposed to design. So in terms of your CV then, when you're applying for product roles, in my opinion, your CV should shout the following things. Firstly, that you're proactive. And a great way of showing this is through working on side projects or getting involved with startups. Also, your experience should show that you're comfortable, and able to work with others. There's a huge people element to the role of the product manager. That's something I really love. Every day you're interacting with loads of different stakeholders in lots of different functions. So you have to be able to work with others. And finally, your CV should show that you're impact driven. So if you're talking about your experience and you're saying you increased signups or improved conversion somewhere, put a metric on it. Don't just say you did it. Make it more tangible by providing a metric. Then in terms of skills, as mentioned previously, it's really important to show technical skills. A great way of doing this is through doing online courses and also analytical skills as well. So lots of PM job descriptions will emphasize that you have to be really strong in analytics. And again, online courses and learning things like SQL or SQL is really helpful here. So very quickly, how to actually find PM roles, and the focus here is on entry level. So typically, and most commonly, it's probably called associate product manager or junior product manager as well. You have a visitor here. Some companies, such as Facebook, I think, have a rotational product manager program, and it's also probably worth looking for product owner roles as well. But typically, I would advise people to initially look for an internship as a stepping stone towards getting into product, and that's what I did, and it might be less competitive getting an internship as well, but that mightn't always be the case. So let's say you search for roles and hopefully you find lots of positions. Then it's worth taking a step back and thinking about what type of company you want to work at. So obviously I work at TripAdvisor, which is a multinational company. And I think there are lots of benefits to starting your product career at such a company. Firstly, I'm learning a lot from the other PMs around me and learning best-in-class practices. Also, I'm learning to engage in a large organization with lots of different stakeholders. And this is also really interesting as well. So apart from just engineering, design, and analytics and copy, I'm also interacting with trust and safety, finance, supplier support, legal, all the time. And that's really interesting to see lots of different people's perspectives. And finally, at a large company, you can also have impact at scale as well. So for example, at Shazam, I think they had 400 million monthly active users. So the products you work on really can have a lot of impact. But on the other side of things, perhaps you could work at a startup. And there you might get more responsibility. And you might also feel a lot closer to the product and the end user as well, which is potentially something that you might lose a bit at a larger company. But perhaps there might be less process at a startup, and you mightn't learn as many best-in-class practices. Now, overall, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here. I think at my stage of my career, I benefit from being at a large company, but I'll definitely work for a startup again in the future. And then finally, in terms of the space, it'll obviously be different working as a PM at a B2B or a software as a service company, such as Slack, for example, as it would be a B2C company, such as Spotify, or again, a marketplace like TripAdvisor or eBay. So it's worth just thinking about what kind of products you're interested in as well. And then even within a company, there'll be a lot of variation in terms of the role of the PM, depending on what part of the product they're working on. So you might be more technically focused, and your team might build APIs, for example, and there might be very little user interface. Or it could be more user experience focused. What I'd say is it's important to find your sweet spot and what area of the product you like to work on. But as someone with a non-technical background, try not to necessarily shy away from working on more technical things. I really like my role at TripAdvisor and the kind of payments and security space because I'm working on quite technical projects such as integrations, but everything kind of has a user-facing and design element as well, which is really nice. Just to quickly talk about the interview process. So round one tends to be a screening with a recruiter. So this is where you submit your CV and they're interested enough to give you an initial phone call or a Skype. And at this stage, I'd say it's just really important to own your story as to why you want to get into product. So some of the feedback I got from recruiters was that my CV read really well because I tried startups, then I tried a different role at a larger company, and I kind of stumbled across product management. So it made sense to the recruiter, I guess. Round two tends to be an initial screening with the hiring manager, where they might ask you some more scenario-based questions. And then round three then tends to be where you get given a take-home assignment. So you'll have about 3 to 5 days to prepare an exercise, and this typically could be quite broad, like come up with a new product feature for that company or a completely unrelated company. And again, you get a couple of days to complete this, and it's really worth putting in a lot of effort into this exercise. In my opinion, this is really the make or break, in the interview process, and if you don't put in the effort, someone else will, and as mentioned previously, it is quite competitive. For this exercise, on my website, I've actually put together a sample exercise, which you can download, and I can provide feedback on that as well. And I'll link my website at the end of the slides too. So now you've got your role, and I'm going to talk about surviving and thriving in your first few months as a PM. Firstly, it's really important to learn from those around you. I'm very lucky at TripAdvisor that I'm surrounded by a really strong team of product managers. And with anything, just look at what they're doing. So for example, with specs, if you're coming up with your first feature specification, don't just start from scratch yourself. Ask for more senior PMs to send you a copy of theirs, and you can see how they approached it. Similarly, with raising tickets on Jira or your project management software, look at how more experienced PMs around you do it. Do they use user stories, acceptance criteria? There's kind of best class practices. And also look at how more senior people around you run meetings. In product, it's really important to know when to take a step back and pause during a meeting with stakeholders to clarify things. And I think that's something that at entry level can be quite intimidating to do because you don't want to look stupid, but it's much more efficient to clarify things during a meeting rather than having to go back to the stakeholder a couple of days later. So working with stakeholders then, so your main stakeholders are likely in engineering and design. With engineering, I'd say it's just really important to know what the next priority is, and also not to lose sight of the end goal. So you don't want to get too caught up in edge cases. You want to focus on what's the most important deliverables and make sure you deliver on that. And when working with design, it's really good practice to make it visual. So if you are getting them to design a new feature or mock up a new prototype, map it out in a nice process flow chart, and that makes it much more easy for them to understand and deliver work as well. And with working with stakeholders in general, just remember that you're a generalist and you're working with specialists. So you're not supposed to understand everything they understand to the same degree that they do, but you need to understand it enough to be able to distill from what they tell you what the next priority is. Now in terms of working within the product organization, so it's very important to get feedback early and often on your projects. Kind of like the way, with the lean startup and everything, that you're encouraged to get an MVP out there as quick as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it's better to get feedback earlier because a more experienced product manager might then give you a different slant on your approach, which you might realize is the preferred route. So it doesn't have to be too perfect before approaching others. Be able to back up your decisions, and the best way of doing this is by considering and outlining all the different scenarios and options, and then coming back and reflecting on what was the main reasoning for your choice. This is particularly in a larger organization as well. It's really important to identify dependencies. So if you need another team to, say, launch a campaign related to your product launch, you're not necessarily going to jump to the top of their roadmap straight away. So it's important to identify these things early on when you're speccing out a project. Being on top of results. So you have to know if the feature you launched was a success or not. And it's really important to be on top of that, knowing in advance what metrics you're looking to follow and following them, and either being able to run queries yourself or having analytics lined up to do so. Then voicing ideas you have for process improvements. So just because you're at entry level doesn't mean that you don't have ideas on how to improve things in general. One of the things that I've recommended at TripAdvisor, and it's something that ties in with the last point there about building a learning community, is that I recognized there was an opportunity for more PMs to become more familiar with SQL and to learn basic SQL for analytics so that they can run their own queries themselves. So I created a Slack group called SQL Review, and this has really helped in that people can post in their queries, and then people who are more familiar can then look at them and give feedback and make sure it makes sense. It's kind of about voicing your ideas and trying to, if you learn something, trying to teach others as well, I suppose. And learning to juggle. So as a PM, you'll have lots of things to do, and it's really important to get organized. I think initially I just listed everything in a massive Google Doc, but I then started using Trello, and that's quite important. And I think my backlog list is always, as long as I am. But it's really important to be organized. Preparing for meetings. So you're going to have lots of different meetings with different stakeholders, and it's important to know what you want to get out of those meetings and don't just wing it, essentially. and learn to prioritize. So this is something that you can either do yourself or get your manager's input on as well. But it's very important to know what priorities are because you'll always have too many things to do. And make time to upskill yourself as well. So when I joined TripAdvisor, I didn't actually have any analytical skills. I kind of proactively learned SQL on the side, and this has been really beneficial for me. And once you know it, you actually tend to use it most days in your role. And the best way of learning SQL, just as a side, I feel is by asking real business questions as opposed to kind of learning in some kind of vacuum. So ask yourself, how much revenue did we get in this region in a certain month? And then try to find the answer yourself. It's also really satisfying as well. And I guess the overall mission, I suppose, this kind of aspirational for me, would be to become a full stack PM. So what I mean by this is someone who really understands code, and I'd love to someday get to the place where maybe I can fix minor bugs and things myself without having to necessarily get engineers to do it. Someone really understands design and what is good user experience. As mentioned previously about SQL, really owning your analytics and being able to run your own queries and without having to rely on others, because you'll typically find that your analytics team will be absolutely swamped with requests. And finally, deliver like a boss. And what I mean by this is making sure that you plan out, so your rollout plan, and you meet your milestones, and you deliver on time and to the specs as expected. So I think that is it. So I'm not sure if we're doing questions now or at the end, but thank you.